Hey guys, this is Jerry from Moderate Movement. We're not a political party, but we're just trying to find a balance with a lot of aspects of life. Today, our special guest is Professor Paul Levinson. How are you?
Good. How about you?
Good. Well, my video feed seems like it's frozen. Can you see me?
I can see you. Yeah, It looks like I'm a little delayed as far as what I can see
Yeah,
of
I'm a little
myself
delayed
here.
too. Let me see technical difficulties right when we were ready, huh? Let me go to, I'll do this. Choose three, and then I'm going to add you here. There we go. That looks better.
Okay, good.
Professor, how are you today?
I'm actually doing pretty good. One of the things I'm taking advantage of being home is spending much more time in my garden. Believe it or not,
Where do you
I
live?
find it very a little north of New York City,
Okay.
in White Plains, and my wife and I grew up in the Bronx in very nice apartments, but not in places where we had our own land. And so, back in 1992, our kids were still very young. We moved up here, and we've always loved it. And it's especially nice now when we can't really
Yeah,
go
being locked
anywhere.
at home, right? Imagine
Yeah.
being in that Bronx. Did you have a small apartment back then?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that small, but it's certainly not as large as this rambling house we
Oh,
have up here.
sorry, this camera disconnects sometimes. I don't know what happened about that. But what the heck here? Technology.
Yeah, I know.
You
It
know, it's
always it
funny.
always goes wrong at the worst
Some
times.
people actually complain that when their video feeds gets taken off of Facebook, it's Mark Zuckerberg taking them down, right?
Right. Yeah, like he has the time to do
Yeah,
that.
exactly. He's going after them.
Yeah,
Well, you're
right.
well. You know what? While I'm getting this connected, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you can see, I don't have that much hair on my head, so I wear a whole bunch of hats. One of the things I do, as you and most people know, is I'm a professor of communication
Hmm.
and media studies at Fordham University in New York City. I love teaching.
Hmm.
We just finished this term online, of course, and I enjoy teaching online. But for me, there's really nothing like the thrill, and it is going into a classroom for the first time, seeing my students getting involved in conversations.
Yeah.
I'm also a writer. I have about 15 books, nonfiction books about the history, current situation, and future of media. They've been translated into 15 languages, actually. I'm also a science fiction author. I'm constantly making stuff up. So, sometimes people attack my nonfiction and say it reads like science fiction. And I always say, oh, well, good. You like science fiction? And I mention one of my science fiction titles. Right, what you have on the screen there, that's pretty much my nonfiction. And then in addition to all that, because I like doing as much damage as possible, in 1972, before I even got into the academic world, I came out with an album
Hmm.
called Twice Upon a Rhyme. It sold a negative number of copies. Yeah. And for many years, the only poor people that heard it, in addition to me, were my wife and then our two kids.
Absolutely.
So, and but it was sort of rediscovered in Japan, of all places. Like in 2002, someone did a review of it. One thing led to another. Anyway, to make a long story short, about a year and a half ago, another record company contacted me and said, "Hey, you're a science fiction writer. We love your album. We came across it also. Would you like to record a new album of science fiction related songs? Do you have any?" And actually, I did. And even if I hadn't, I would have said I did, and then I
Right.
would have quickly written some. Anyway, and so the third part of my creative life is music, and my new album, Welcome Up: Songs of Space and Time, is really exciting, at least to me, and I'm having a really good time, talking to people about it. I've done a couple of virtual
Hmm.
concerts in the last month or two, so those are pretty much I guess, four things that I do. Professor, nonfiction author, science fiction author, and singer-songwriter.
So being in lockdown, I think being a Renaissance man really keeps our sanity.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And, I have to tell you, I'm always in what used to be our normal situation. I'm always pressed for time. I don't have enough time to do this, to finish that, and so on. Well, I'm still pressed for time because that's the kind of person I am. But I do have a little more time now. And because, what can you do when you're driving? Fordham University is only about 20 minutes by car from where I live. So, I can listen to things.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly can't do writing. I mean, I can speak and have it recorded, but I appreciate not having to waste that time in transit.
So I've seen some of your videos on YouTube, and you've talked a lot about media, right? That's a big subject matter. And let's go for a little further back. Recent times, where a lot of us remember, is the I think it was the Sony hacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so has that been settled? It was North Korea?
Pretty much. I mean, you never know. Because what happens is people who know what they're doing, in many cases former hackers themselves, but who now are working for some kind of company or even the government, do the best they can to trace these hacks. And, there are certain crumbs that hackers leave. But it's really a never-ending cat and mouse game. A clever enough hacker can make it look like someone else did the hacking.
Right.
And that stands until some clever counter hacker figures that out. But yeah, it does look like it came from North Korea. I think North Korea said they did it at some point, but you don't know if that's true either. And as you know from what I said in the video, I mean, the moral of the story is, and I don't mean to be facetious about it, but if you don't want someone to hack compromising pictures, don't put them online in the first place.
Or compromising emails, right? So you said that they were, I didn't know the details, but you said there were some racist comments that were said in emails, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's the same principle. I always tell my students, anything that you put online, whether it's a video, an email, any kind of information that you send out from your phone or your computer, you might as well put it on the Times Square letter crawl, because the whole world, the whole universe is going to see it, or could see it, because once it's out of your hands, two things about it. It has a life of its own, and it lives forever.
Right.
And that's something that's just a fact of life.
So I think in your interview here that we're showing, you called the movie a stupid movie. Did you ever watch it?
Yeah, I did, actually, because I wanted to back up my what I said about it.
What did you think?
I thought it was okay. It didn't deserve an Oscar,
no.
But actually, it wasn't the worst movie I ever saw. I thought it was all right.
No,
but I have strange taste, though, in movies and television shows, and so shows that some people like, I don't like at all, and shows that hardly anyone talks about, I think are brilliant. I mean, for example, I've just mentioned, I just finished binging the third season, and I really highly recommend this, a series called Babylon Berlin. It takes place in the Weimar Republic in the late 1920s in Germany. And, you have to stick with it. It's in German. I actually speak Yiddish, so I understand a little of it because Yiddish is related to German. But, some of it is heavy going, but it is one of the best movies or television shows I've ever seen about the fragility of democracy. Because those people in Germany in the late 1920s, they had a democracy. And,
right.
They expected it to last. And, they saw the dangers. I mean, they would be set by they would be set by monarchists, by communists, by the Nazis. No one liked the democracy, but somehow they all thought in government back then that they would make it, and they didn't. And so it's not a very popular movie series, but it's well worth watching, I think.
I think another video you talked about how you appreciate how Netflix is that new wave, right? And it's allowing us to explore videos that we couldn't get from when it was just broadcast over the airwaves, right?
Absolutely. I love streaming. If you go back, the origin of television, we're talking about the 1950s when it first became a mass medium and it grew very quickly. You just had a handful of networks and that broadcast networks. And that was the first wave. The second wave was the revolution in cable television, beginning with The Sopranos on HBO, and moving into Showtime and AMC and all kinds of other cable networks, and they really pushed the boundaries of television. But just as cable was basking in that glory, suddenly you have Netflix and Amazon Prime and now Hulu jumping into the game a few years ago already. And what they have done is really opened up the gates to creative people. It's now much easier to get a movie, to get a series on television. Even by the way, a low-budget movie was made of one of my science fiction short stories, The Chronology Protection Case. I didn't make the movie, somebody else did. You can find it on Amazon Prime.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful thing for both creators, and it also has given everyone in the world a much greater tableau and series of movies and television shows to choose from, which obviously is especially helpful in this pandemic age when so many people are stuck at home.
Do we know, or do you probably know this answer? What is the most viewed episode or something on television? The some things that stand out: the lunar landing, the last episode of MASH. Have we beat those records now?
No, we haven't.
Are you serious? Despite many more TVs out there.
Precisely, though, because there are so many venues out there, and what's happened is now at any given evening,
everyone up.
That's right. So if you want to say who was the most watched newscaster on television, it was Walter Cronkite. He regularly had 75 to 80 million viewers on CBS. In the 1970s, the Gallup poll at one point asked people, who do you trust more than anyone else? And a majority of people answered Walter Cronkite. So he was enormously influential. And then you had television shows like Dallas. Everybody remembers Dallas. Dallas, regularly brought in 50, 60 million viewers. But when they were doing an episode, Who Killed JR?
JR, right?
Yeah, that one brought in like 85, 90 million people. And by the way, to this day, the most watched, and we're not going to see it again this year unless things get better, but the most watched television broadcast, and it's available worldwide, is the Super Bowl, which gets as many as 115, 120 million people. That's extraordinary. Marshall McLuhan talked about the world being a global village, but the truth is the whole world rarely watches something at the same time, and the Super Bowl is an exception.
So another thing that you touched on in some of your previous videos online was, let me see, we have deep fakes. Deep fakes is it is already a problem, right? Or what do you feel?
Well, it's a very serious problem because we human beings, we're pretty intelligent, and most people realize when you're reading something or hearing or seeing a reporter talk about something, we're not experiencing that event firsthand. We're reading somebody else's interpretation. We're listening to someone else's report of that event. But when you look at a video, we tend to think that, hey, this is really happening. So anyone who's watching us talk right now, they think correctly, in this case, you and I are having a conversation. But what happens when somebody takes a video takes a video of me and puts in something that has me saying, my favorite kind of television is the sitcom. Now, I never said that, and I never would say that because, in general, there are a few sitcoms like Curb Your Enthusiasm and Going Back Years, All in the Family that I like and even love. But by and large, I don't spend much time watching sitcoms on television. So that would be a deep fake of me. But the problem is they'd see my face, they'd see my lips moving. If the person who's making the deep fake knows what he or she is doing, it will look to the viewer like I'm actually saying that. And then what is the viewer going to do? There are no hairs that stand up on the back of the viewer's head because they sense there's something wrong. If they don't know me in the first place, and there's a deep fake of me saying something which I never said, that will go down as truth. And the only defense against deep fakes are when they're political. My advice to everyone is if you see someone and you know they have a certain opinion about something, a certain person in office, and they're saying something that's totally contradictory to what you know about them, you should investigate a little further. Yeah, and then if you check around, you'll see that obviously the person never said that.
But you could even exaggerate what someone said. We know maybe Trump will say something like this that's pretty extreme. Could we take it further?
Yeah, well, look, what a lot of people don't realize, and again, they sort of realize it when it comes to written reports, but they don't realize it when it comes to videos, is even when you're not making deep fakes, there's always editing involved. Mm-hmm. So let's say, for example, someone we're going to be talking for about an hour. Let's say somebody just wanted to show a few minutes of what it was like you and I having a conversation. And let's say we had no control over that. They could edit it in a way that might make it look that we were talking. Yeah, and that's why it's very easy, and everyone does it. And one of the things I always point out, you talk about deep fakes, you talk about propaganda. Propaganda is not just something that bad people do. And to use a really strong example, in World War II, the Germans used a lot of propaganda. Do you know who else used a lot of propaganda?
America.
We did. Exactly. Exactly. And you can see it even in some of these great old posters, that survived. So, for example, there's a famous poster, "Loose lips sink ships."
Let's pull that up.
Yeah. Don't talk about, anything that has to do with any political thing, anything with the war. Yeah, good.
There it is.
There you go. And so, but the problem with that poster, if you think about it, it was sort of squelching communication, right? I mean, it was maybe for a good purpose. The truth of the matter is most people could have a conversation anytime they wanted. They didn't have to worry about a Nazi spy hearing it. And so this poster, again, it might have been for a good purpose, was a form of propaganda that manipulated Americans. So everybody does it, and this is one of the things that we need to be aware of. And the more that we're aware of, whether it's point of view, that there could be some propaganda in that presentation, the better off we are. Because I think the goal is to try to get the truth, to try to sift the truth out of this enormous amount of information that we're constantly bathed in. And it's not easy. It's certainly not impossible, but it's not easy.
I catch I be careful. I have an emotional response. I see something that's against my beliefs. I want to cuss them out or whatever, but I have to really balance myself out. But I think we respond with postings on Facebook where we see something that appeals to our biasness. We don't even research it, right? We just immediately share it out, and then you can easily just check the domain name of the link and see that it's a fake news site, just like that. People don't practice that. You're losing your credibility.
That's right. Well, there was a great psychologist who taught at Harvard University beginning in the 1950s through at least the 1970s. His name was Leon Festinger, and he came up with a theory and even wrote a book about cognitive dissonance, as he called it. And what he was saying is, every human being, not just bad people or people who, every human being wants to surround themselves with views that don't cause dissonance inside our heads. So if we believe in something, if we feel a certain way, if we have a certain political opinion, we will naturally gravitate towards presentations that support that opinion.
Echo chamber.
And we will push out of our way presentations that contradict that opinion. and everybody has this. Nowadays it's called news bubbles. Now, the only time that bubble gets broken is if something that we're not agreeing with hits home on some other level, and then we get a little shaken up, and that's when we examine, hey, we need to look outside our beliefs. But, one of the great things I think about the internet, because you don't find it on television, you don't find it on either cable or network television, where the news is very polarized. But one of the great things about the internet is it gives us a lot of different sources. Yeah. So that's why I always encourage people, don't just take it from one or two sources. If you have any doubt about something, check it out.
Right. So a friend of mine, he's probably watching later on, his name's John. He worked for CBS News affiliate in Dallas. And he's a really critical thinker. And when asked, how do we vet sources? He's like, listen, if you want a simple thing, he says broadcast news tends to be a little bit less biased than cable news. Do you feel that? Less, might not be perfect.
Yeah, it is a little less. The problem with cable news is you never know 100% whether what you're watching is just a news presentation or a strong political opinion. Mm-hmm. So, for example, just to give two shows on MSNBC, which does have a progressive leaning, the 10 to 11 o'clock hour is Lawrence O'Donnell, and he is basically on cable an op-ed speaker. That is, although he presents facts, everything is his opinion and his view. That's followed by Brian Williams. By the way, the same Brian Williams who used to do the NBC nightly newscast. His show is much more factual and much more just presentation of news. And if you go over to Fox, you find the same thing. Mm-hmm. Someone like Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson, what they are is political points of view. But there are other shows, on Fox. Britt Hume, and I can't remember the person's name who succeeded him, has like an evening news show. Shep Smith is no longer on Fox, but they used to present just more straight news. So that's why there is less opinion on broadcast television than there is on cable. Mm-hmm. But the problem is you have all news stations on cable which mix together both opinion and news. So that's why, other things being equal, if you look at a news show on network television, it's more likely to be just news than a cable show. You
remember the saying, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are, right? Now we can say, tell me who you get your news from and I'll tell a lot about you.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you a little story, and without revealing anyone's name other than, mine. But back in 2008, and this is apropos of Facebook. I mean, and let me just say parenthetically, one of the great things about Facebook is how you can get in touch with people that you haven't seen since you were in the same class with them in public school.
Absolutely,
in 6th grade. and I just love that. So I have many old friends that I've gotten back in touch with. One of them in 2008 said, who are you? It was already, both candidates had been nominated. So it was Barack Obama versus John McCain. And I said, well, pretty much Barack Obama. I mean, there are things I like about McCain, but I like Obama better. And he said, I'm surprised to hear you say that. And he started, talking about McCain. But it became clear as we were having this conversation that he got his news from Fox and I got my news from MSNBC. And, again, that is another expression of what I was saying before, the news bubbles, the avoidance of cognitive dissonance. Once you have an opinion, other things being equal, back when everyone went out to work and came home, like you're a little tired in the evening, you're unwinding, you put the kids to bed, you want to watch a little news, you don't want to hear people say things that contradict what you believe. So
you piss you off more.
Yes, you gravitate to things that are supportive of your views.
Well, let me ask you, what are some stations or sources for news for you?
Well, okay, basically, since I am a professor of communication and media studies at Fordham, it sort of obliges me. I'm not a normal person. I'm a professor. So it sort of obliges me to watch a little of everything so I know what I'm talking about. So how do I know, what Shep Smith, said on Fox and, how do I know what Sean Hannity now says? It's because I do watch Fox sometimes. Yeah. But left to my own devices, when I'm not being a professional, I want to be aware of things. I think that's a better way of looking at it. As far as news is concerned, I tend to watch, and I'm sure Donald Trump wouldn't be happy about this, pretty much 2 cable stations, MSNBC and CNN. And by the way, CNN, I think, presents a lot more news than MSNBC. And that's one of the reasons why I watch CNN, because sometimes I just want the news. And then, on radio, I occasionally listen to NPR, which I find useful. I've been listening to them, for years. But the other thing I have to tell you, and I was getting at this before, is I also get an enormous amount of my news from various online sources. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. I find those very useful. And, I love television. I love watching television, but I also love reading. It's 2 different ways of getting information. And that's another thing I always urge, to my students. Try to get your information from a variety of media, the written word, the spoken word, the audio, visual.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. I've been taking in a lot more foreign news because I kind of want to see what the perspective is from outside. So I've been watching a lot of NHK World. Do you know where their media or where their biasness stands? Do they have a bias? Do you know anything about that? With Japan?
So, yes, I was going to say that. Well, their bias is, pro-Japan. So there's no doubt about that. As to how they cover things that are going on in the United States and things that are going on in the world. First of all, any news organization is going to have a bias based on their locale. So all of our news operations, regardless of whether they're conservative or progressive, are biased towards the United States. They're going to be looking more carefully at the United States. But I think in general, if you look at NHK, if you look at the BBC, if you look at various, international news operations, when they are reporting on the United States, they tend to be more reliably objective than our American.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, see that? And we they're, praising Trump, where an American station might not be comfortable doing that. They're okay attacking Trump, where another station in America might not be comfortable doing that. So, and this is even true of the BBC, which is probably the closest to American television. But any operation that's not on American soil is going to give you a more objective view. So good for you for watching that. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it gives a more objective report?
Well, what I find is like they're just going to tell me what happened in the U.S. and it's usually Trump right now. So Trump said this. We're not going to tell you our opinion. He said this. You do what you need to with that information. I love it. I feel like I just got a fresh source of energetic, or just nutrient-rich food. Doesn't feel like it's salted down and flavored. Oh, it just, here, give me the news. So I love it. I feel less stressed out about it. You know.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think of the three American cable all news networks, I think CNN does the most amount of just news, even though Trump feels that CNN is fake news. So, you know,
what is? Excuse me. What is there's a condition, and I have some conservative friends and family, and they call it where the liberals are always after Trump, and they're always it's a Trump. There's a term for that they use. There's even groups where they say "No Trump Tuesdays" or something in their Facebook group. No Trump for today. We're tired of it. And I had to ask, what the hell is NTT, or No Trump Tuesdays? Yeah, what the hell's NTT? And they're like, this guy doesn't know. It means No Trump Tuesday. And so sometimes when you see friends or family who post about Trump all the time, these conservatives come in. It's like, Jesus, you really have that syndrome about attacking Trump. You know, have you heard of this?
I haven't heard of it, but I've certainly seen a lot.
They're coining it like places. It's like a mental issue now.
Yeah, yeah. But look, it is a very, very complicated and therefore difficult and unprecedented situation, because I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times prior to this in American history was somebody elected president in the Electoral College who had lost the popular vote. I mean, it happened with Gore v. Bush in 2000. Maybe it happened one other time, William Harrison versus Grover Cleveland in, like, I think 1884, 1888 or something like that. But so that started everything off. You know, in a very contentious in Hillary Clinton were beside themselves that somehow the Electoral College resulted in this. You know, I went out and I gave a talk, and you can find that in one of my videos too, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, about fake news. And I remember one of the first things I said, I don't know if this endeared me to the audience, I said, you know, you in the state are responsible for Donald Trump being president, because, you know, Michigan went for Trump. But I said, don't worry, I'm not going to hold you responsible. But, you know, you know, I was joking, but I think that was a feeling that a lot of people had. So that's where it started. And then, you know, obviously one thing led to another, you know, the whole James Comey thing. Frankly, I think the single biggest reason that Hillary lost the Electoral College was because James Comey, 6 weeks prior to the election, said we're reopening, you know, the Hillary email business. Why? Because the husband of Uma Abedin, former Representative Weiner, basically started sending some, you know, obscene photographs again online, and this time to minors. So one thing led to another. So, you know, that's, you know, where it started. And then when Trump fired Comey, that just stirred up everything, and it's pretty much been nonstop in an unpredictable way. No one, as bad as things were last year, and they were pretty bad last year politically, no one, not a single soul, said, hey, you know what, let's fast forward to May 2020. 70,000 Americans will have died. You know, people now hate Trump because they think he should have done something. Look, you can say this about any political leader. They all should have done more.
Yeah.
But I don't know if anything. What can you do against a virus that we, as a biological species, had no experience in? Although I will say, I think Trump could have done a lot more.
Right.
This is not just the wisdom of hindsight, and that's one of the reasons why there's so much political intensity.
Do you feel that China could have been a little bit more forthright with the information earlier on?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is every country, it's such a tense world, wants to protect themselves. And I think, I have a lot of friends in China. About 10 of my books have been translated into Chinese. I have translators there who are friends of mine. I have former students who are Chinese. So, I understand something of China. And, they by and large, have a very robust scientific community. Mm-hmm. They seek the truth just like we do. But like every other country, when something happens like this and, you suddenly start hearing that in, this Chinese province, people are dying so quickly, your first response is, okay, I want to find out what's going on. But right after that, you don't want the world breathing down your neck and pinning something on you that you might not be responsible for. But again, to get back to Trump, I don't like the fact that he says, contrary to what his own intelligence agencies are telling him, that, even the implication that China somehow developed this deliberately, I mean, that really is such an outrageous claim that nobody should be saying that unless they have real
I think,
proof.
we need an investigation before we say things like that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, there's been an investigation. I mean, apparently not a single. There are 5 intelligence agencies. They're called the 5 Eyes or something. The United States, England, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and they tend to share information. Mm-hmm. All 5 of them agree that China did not deliberately concoct this virus.
You don't think the U.S. created this, right?
No, I don't think anybody created it.
Well, China's spreading that news too,
Yes, of course. Well, listen, here, I'll tell you, though, what the source of all that is. This is such an unusual virus. I, in my life, have never heard of anything like this. I mean, so I was just emailing a person last night, a friend of mine out on the island, who was tested positive for the coronavirus. And I said to him, well, listen, take care of yourself, rest. He said, I feel 100% fine. I don't even have so much as a sniffle or a sore throat, let alone a cough. So this ranges from people who get the virus, they're perfectly fine, to people who are dead in 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. So, I mean, it is insane, and it's of such a wide range of symptoms. So that, listen, as a science fiction writer, I could easily imagine a story. No country on Earth developed this, but some aliens who want to take over the Earth, someplace from around Alpha Centauri.
Yeah. Hey, that's a science fiction story right there for you.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a question real quick.
Go ahead.
Jason, do you see that on your screen?
Yeah, I do. Do I think China lied about their numbers? If so, why? Yeah, they probably did. They wanted to keep their numbers down. Look, again, all political leaders do this. Trump didn't lie about the numbers, but you may recall very early on he said, well, we have 15 cases. How hard is it going to be to get it down to 1? Then we'll have no cases. He shouldn't have said that. But I didn't believe it when he said that, not when it had done such damage already in China and it was beginning to wreak havoc on Europe. But yes, I would be stunned if China didn't lie about their numbers.
Yeah, I think they are. Here's a follow-up to that, he said. Let's see if you can see on the screen. What do you think about that?
Yes, if this particular pandemic was caused by the researchers were investigating something in a lab and it slipped out of the lab accidentally, I think that is a possibility. For whatever reason, and just to make that crystal clear, people like Anthony Fauci, who are very experienced in this, has said that the research is just looking at the virus's DNA and RNA. It's not even a living organism that living organisms, like some kind of massive like little DNA and RNA mixed together. But apparently, experienced scientists, when they examine this carefully, can see that it was not the result of gene splicing. It was not put together. So that's why that much they know. No one created it. But did it slip out of the lab because the Chinese were investigating it because it showed up in a market earlier, or did it just start in a market? That I think no one knows the answer to, and they're all possibilities.
Professor, you're going to hear people, on both sides where they're just not going to even accept that as being the truth. They literally need to see with their own eyes, but they're going to have to go to school to learn about viruses and DNA, and they're not. They could be, an internet person, an internet business person. They could be an accountant. They just have these conspiracy theories. How do you talk to these people? Should you just oh, well, can't do anything about it with these people?
Okay, I'll tell you something about me. I am by nature an optimist, and I also believe, along with, for example, John Milton, that most human beings are capable of separating truth from falsity. That most human beings are rational. That dolphins and dogs, and chimps and great apes, which in many ways are the closest to us in terms of DNA. Great apes and chimps have over 98% the same DNA as we do. They are not rational, however, as Aristotle pointed out thousands of years ago. We are the only rational beings on this planet. So I think that most people, including people who believe in conspiracy theories, if you present the truth to them in a non-threatening way, that sooner or later you can convince them that their conspiracy theory is off. But look, sometimes these things become matters of faith. And if you think about what faith is something that transcends logic. And in fact, the belief that rationality is the way to live, that itself is a question of faith. Because if you want to prove to someone that you should be rational, you have to make a rational appeal to that person. And that basically is just a tautological, you're using the very thing, rationality, that other people are disputing to prove that rationality works. So it's a very, very tough thing when someone goes from rationality into faith. It's very hard to talk that person out of that faith in a conspiracy theory. But I think nonetheless it's possible. Maybe that's all because I'm an optimist, but I think I'm right anyway.
It's funny, in Facebook I'm seeing a huge resurgence of the pedophilia ring from the Democrats, right? And the Pizzagate is coming back up, and Bill Gates and this kind of controlling of reproduction, right? I feel like these are the trends that are just surfacing, and people are just trying to find reasons to to understand what's going on right now, or what's going to happen, including vaccines and stuff, right? Do you see that?
Absolutely. I saw something just last night. I can't honestly remember where I saw it, which basically said that all of what's going on is part of a plot to inject us with little nanotech that will be inside our bodies and allow everyone to track where we are for the rest of our lives. And these people created this virus to make us so sick and to get everyone so worried that they'll all go to get injections of vaccine. Look, the problem is when you're dealing with matters of life and death, and it's not just life and death for people you don't know. It's life and death for friends, for family. That's about as wrenching and disrupt, as it gets. And so in terms of what I said before about people being inherently rational, those are the times when it's very hard to be rational. And so sometimes people go off the deep end and subscribe to conspiracy theories.
Well, let's be honest. We have a history where the government has done some, excuse my language, bullshit and done some malicious things to the people, right?
Absolutely. And even things that are not necessarily malicious. To this day, we, and I include me in that, so I don't know whether or not our planet has ever been visited, apropos of what I said earlier, by extraterrestrials, because they covered up. The government, going back to the 1940s, there are pictures of what look like UFOs. Are they forgeries? But the government has been very closed about this. Every once in a while they release information and so on. So, we live in a situation in which the government has not told us the truth. In all kinds of ways, it hasn't told us the truth.
But as a father, you could probably lie to your kids for good reason, right?
Well, I'm glad
we don't want to say the government's our father, but yeah, I understand.
No. Well, but that's exactly right. The government isn't our father, but that's why I was saying before, propaganda is not just something that bad people do. Parents lie to their kids all the time for good reasons. In fact, people lie all the time for good reasons. I got to say, I always tell this story. I was asked to be on a jury a couple of years ago. And, I'm a public-minded person, but I had a lot of things to do. So they're asking me, they're vetting the potential jurist, and they say, someone, I guess the attorney for the defense says to me, do you believe a police officer could lie? And without thinking, I just said, are you kidding? Any human being could lie. Everyone. Exactly. So I thought, as soon as I said that, hey, great, this will get me off the jury. Instead, they made me foreperson of the jury.
Professor, I feel like people are try to act like it's this binary world where they say, I never lie. Come on. I'm a good person. I never talk bad about people. Come on, we're a spectrum. Okay? I've had ex-girlfriends call me an asshole. I was like, maybe sometimes. I'm a spectrum. I'm not a complete jerk. But we're all a spectrum of something. And I never lie. Come on. I lied probably in this video already. Just kidding.
It's probably, listen, well, so you would enjoy, if you haven't yet read him, Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Let me write this
another
down.
Philosopher. Yeah, Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein. But my spelling is terrible. Ludwig von Wittgenstein. Anyway, he wrote a book, the Tractatus. I think it was published maybe 1920. And one of the points he makes in this book, and communication theorists love this, is the very act of communicating, of talking about anything or writing about anything, is to lie. What did he mean by that? There's no way, if you are describing anything, that you can tell the entirety, the entire truth of that situation. If you ask me, okay, hey, Levinson, you talked about gardening at the beginning of our conversation. What are some of the things you have in your garden? And I would have said, okay, well, we had daffodils, the lilacs are blooming now, this, that, and that. I guarantee you I'd leave things out. Mm-hmm. So if you just think about lies of omission, we lie all the time. To open our mouths is to lie.
I think you were in a panel where someone was talking about hyperboles, and that is not lying or something like that. Trump probably does some hyperboles, and people was like, come on, that's just kind of extending the truth. That's not a lie. It's like, come on, there's a huge difference.
Well, there is. That's the thing. We have to do better than just this clumsy thing. It's a lie. We have to be more subtle and more careful than that. And yes, making something up out of whole cloth is not the same as exaggerating, because when you exaggerate, what that means is there's a kernel of truth there. Mm-hmm. You're making it seem more than it is, but there is some truth in that. Whereas when you make something up out of whole cloth, that is just a lie. By the way, I don't think Trump was lying when he said this, but this is why when Trump said, hey, maybe we should look into consuming disinfectants. Yeah. So there's no kernel of truth in that, right? I was thinking at the time, hey, have a shot of scotch, or
that's a disinfectant.
Glass of wine. Yeah, that works, but unfortunately that doesn't do much for viruses.
We have another question from Jason. This guy loves this subject.
Okay, that's an excellent question. An alternative perspective for analyzing a situation is very different from a conspiracy theory, and here is why. I have lots of alternative views on things. And for example, I have an alternative view about transportation in America. I would like to see much more Europe. I love driving my car. I love flying around. But if you've ever been to Europe, I mean, it's just fabulous in a different way to jump on a train and get from Paris to London or vice versa. Anyway, so that's an alternate view about the best kind of transportation system. I'm open, though, that alternate view to criticism. Someone can say to me, well, look, the United States is not the same as Europe. It's such a big country. It would take so long to put high-speed rails across the United States. That's much more difficult than just, say, from London to Paris and so on. So and I might say, okay, yeah, I that's a good point. If you are open to criticism in your alternate view, that's not a conspiracy theory. What makes a conspiracy theory is that as part of the theory, you lock out any attempt
that's good.
to show that it's false. And, it's like a nut that's closed. It's like a self-contained nut with a hard shell. And, you have to crack the shell wide open to get into the nut, but you don't want to do that because that basically destroys the whole thing.
There's one thing a friend of mine says. It's like, hey, do you believe about these conspiracy theories? In regards to what it was, he's like, no, I'm too busy. And that made a good point. Is like when people have a lot of free time, I think they start, especially with COVID being stuck at home, they're going into a rabbit hole of some scary ideas, and they're just going deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of conspiracy theories correspond to misgivings that people might have. And there's no doubt that if you can talk to a bunch of people about it, sometimes those can be worked out. If you're stuck at home and the only audience you have for your misgivings are you and your spouse, by the way, that's one of the good things about spouses and partners. They can say when we're wrong.
Yeah, don't post that online, honey.
Yeah, are you kidding? This is one of my wife's favorite activities, showing that I'm wrong. So it is, staying at home is a hothouse, as you're correctly saying, for conspiracy theories to arise. And, there's an element of propaganda that was identified way back in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And it said that one of the characteristics of propaganda is that it provides a simple solution to a complex problem. So beware of that. And that's why, for example, COVID, that's an incredibly complex problem. We're being hit by something we don't understand, we've had no experience in before, and beware of any simple solution. It feels good, it might sound good, and that's why it's attractive, but that's what propaganda is.
Listen, I feel like even if Bill Gates was behind this, even if he was, what the hell are you going to do about it? Now, you can mobilize people. Sometimes a revolution's in order, right? But you need to make sure you're balanced with the information you're taking in and hearing options, right?
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, again, saying Bill Gates is behind anything is a simple solution to a complex problem. What almost always happens is, in the rare cases where people are able to take care of their problem, things just get worse. Look at the French Revolution, for example. There was a relatively stable society. They overthrew the king and queen. They chopped off their heads. For a little while, everybody was thrilled. The people, long live the people. And what happened? Within a few years, they began killing people. The guillotine began being used not just for royalty, but for anyone who the people in government disagreed with. It got worse and worse until Napoleon Bonaparte became dictator. And so all that happened is they got rid of the king and went back to someone who became emperor, Napoleon. So, and all of that was because of a series of simple solutions to a complex problem. If we can just get rid of the monarchy, kill them, everything will be okay.
We have a question. It's a little bit off topic, but you might be able to give your feedback on that. And at the end, I think he's missing the word comply.
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to start sequestering or taking people in?
It's not going to happen here in the United States. Again, I don't know what happened in China.
It's happening a little bit in China, yeah.
Yeah, and this is an important point, and I'm glad you asked that question, because that's why when you hear that whatever country X is, they're doing a better job of containing it, my first question always is, are they really a democracy? Do people in that country have rights? Because unfortunately, it's easier for a totalitarian state to deal with something like COVID-19 because they can just order people to do whatever the state thinks is right. In a democracy, it's much more difficult. Look, there might be people in the United States who think that should happen, but I would be, vehemently against that. There are other ways of containing people. You don't have to haul them off to isolation camps.
I remember back in the day, they were always talking about FEMA camps, right? And those never happened. I think, what's this guy's name? Alex Jones, was it? He was going around looking at all the coffins that are being piled up and talking about FEMA camps. Did we ever have FEMA camps? Well, in that sense, no, right?
Not that I know of.
Not that I know
look,
of.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things also with conspiracy theories, when there's no obvious or evidence at all, the conspiracy theorists will resort to, that's because they covered that up so nobody knew about it.
That's a great way to play it off, right?
Yeah.
I remember that growing up, I would get exposed from family members about the end of the world from the Christians, the evangelicals. And it was like every 2 years we had a new date. Do you know what that does to a kid?
No, I know.
The date got pushed back because Jesus or God was busy that day or something.
That's right. Well, listen, I grew up in a world where the atom bomb was very new. This was the 1950s.
Always
and we had
happening.
Fallout shelters where I went to school in the Bronx, where we practiced these drills. Let's say we get hit by a bunch of atom bombs, like this little fallout, going downstairs or putting our heads under the desk. That's going to save us? I don't think so.
Did that do anything to you? Did that create who Professor Levinson is today?
It gave me a certain contempt for the attempt of government to instruct people in what to do.
Indoctrinate or...
Yeah.
Do you feel like that was contributed to anything with like the 1960s and 70s, like the hippie movement or peace? Like it just really pushed people to the other side?
Absolutely. Everything that happened in the 60s in one way or another was a reaction to the 1950s. And to go back even further, we win World War II. That was an incredible thing because the Nazis were a real danger. So in the 1950s, we in effect celebrate that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we're going to prepare in case the communists get us and all that stuff. But by the 1960s, and especially after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, all that began to change, and we went in the opposite direction. By the way, some of the things that we went towards were very good, like the sexual revolution. I was always a fan of that. But then the environment movement, what Sputnik did, getting people off planet Earth, got us to take off planet.
What amazing, right? I didn't live through that, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the whole psychedelic thing, actually...
I was going to ask you about that. Have you ever tried psychedelics?
No, I haven't. Believe it or not, I've never tried any drug whatsoever. I puffed once on some marijuana about 50 years ago. I didn't particularly like it, to tell you the truth. But the reason why is I sort of think I'm naturally high. I think someday they'll discover in my brain that I don't need to take anything.
I feel like there are people that are like that. For instance, I'm okay with marijuana and even psychedelics, with moderation, moderate movement, right? I don't have addictions in that case, but weed can help me feel very present, be very grateful, and I tend to forget that. And it's sad. It sucks that I not need it, but I use that and it helps. Some people are very present, and I congratulate them. We don't all have that.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I think whatever it takes for a person to be at top notch, to feel good, to be creative. So fortunately for me, I don't need anything.
Luckily,
I need to eat.
It's an expensive habit for some, right?
Yeah.
Here's another question we have coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very serious question. It would be great if herd immunity worked, because then we wouldn't have to damage and even destroy the economy. And it is true that ultimately, if we don't get the economy back up, people will die as that. I mean, we don't have, the government doesn't have an infinite amount of money. People need to work. But I think the immediate goal has to be to stop this meteoric rise of people going to hospitals and dying. And here in New York City, near where I live, fortunately, the curve has begun to go down. But I've seen several things just in the last couple of days that it's beginning to
With it
rise
opening
all
up.
over the rest of the United States. Yeah, and you know, I think at this point, it's not an easy choice, but we have to err on the side of protecting people, and that's not hoping that herd immunity suddenly kicks in. The only way we know how to protect people now is to isolate them so they don't, through contagion, infect other people. But I do think there's some good news on the horizon. There have been reports in the last day or two about a vaccine that's using RNA that they actually hope really, they started human trials in New York just yesterday. And if they work out, there's a real hope that they could be available as early as September. So we have to go full force on all of these vaccines, all of these measures that mitigate the effects of this horrible disease for people who not only get the disease but have the horrible effects. And if we can get that done in the next couple of months, then we can open the economy. I think right now, look, I have friends in Sweden as well. I love Sweden. It's a great country. I hope they're okay. I wish them well.
Here's a follow-up question regarding New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they are valid, and I think there might even be more than 25%. Again, I mentioned I know a guy who was just in email contact with him last night. He lives out on Long Island, which is like a suburb of New York. I don't even know why he got tested, but he got tested, and he was stunned to find out that his test was positive for COVID-19, and he doesn't have a symptom. He said nothing. He's totally fine.
Was he a vulnerable type of person?
No, I don't know why he got tested. I mean, I thought maybe it was a member of his family. I'm not going to, question him. But he said to me in an email that, he was stunned. That suggests to me that there was not even a member of his family who had it. But look, I think this virus is so strange and based just on this guy's experience. Look, the virus could have been here since last November. I mean, who knows when it got here? And there could be a lot of people. Look, I had a cold whenever it was, like in November, December. I'm only human. It was a little cold. Didn't stop me from teaching. I didn't even have a hoarse voice. For all I know, I had, know. So, but I think the truth will eventually come out, and I don't know this, but, just my opinion. I have a feeling that truth is going to say a lot larger percentage of the population had it than we currently know.
So one of the first videos I got introduced to you was when you were talking about China's involvement with Hollywood. Now, before we get into that, I want to throw in something or ask you about something. It seems like liberal and conservatives are both calling the other side a Nazi. How can they justify every other person's a Nazi? And, which one is the Nazi? What do you think about that?
All I know is that I'm not a Nazi.
Well, yeah, and these people think they're not the Nazi either, right?
I know. Look, the only Nazis in America now are people who are American Nazis, right? Nobody else is a Nazi. And, the problem is it's very easy to go from reality to metaphor. The metaphor being someone is acting like a Nazi. Sure. Someone is a Nazi, using that metaphorically. No one is a Nazi unless they are, in fact, Nazis. I think we can make that assumption.
So can we say it here? Does Professor Levinson think Trump is a Nazi?
No, I don't think
No.
he's a Nazi.
Do you think Biden's a Nazi? Regardless
No,
if you
I
like it or
don't.
not. Hillary Clinton, right? You know, these are just extreme
right.
exaggerations.
That's right.
So
That's right.
David
David Duke.
yeah, there you go.
I mean, I'm not sure if he's still part of the Ku Klux Klan. He certainly was. I don't know if he's a Nazi, but he was certainly Ku Klux Klan at some point in his life.
Yeah, that might be a close Nazi there.
Yeah.
So let's get into this. Cruz put in a bill, right? Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say I was amazed to find myself in agreement with at least this part of the bill. It's probably the only other thing I agreed with Cruz about is when he was running against Trump for the Republican nomination, and I would have voted for Cruz if I was voting in that Republican primary. But the particular situation, I think if you or anyone believes in freedom, that freedom should extend not just to freedom of speech, but to freedom of artistic expression. And that pertains to if a movie maker, a company in Hollywood makes a movie, I think that the movie that they make should be shown in theaters, not a movie that someone has taken the movie that was made and cuts things out of the movie because you think it'll play better in your theater or in your country. Now, here in the United States, a movie theater can say, hey, I don't want to show this movie. Netflix can say, I don't want to show the movie. Amazon Prime Video can say the same thing. But none of those places have the right to basically cut something out of a movie and show, certainly without the movie company's permission. Well, China, again, they're a totalitarian society. There are a lot of things that I like about China, as I've mentioned before. But one thing I don't like about China is the Chinese government insists from time to time that, hey, we'll be happy to show your movie in our theaters, which comes with a lot of money because there are huge audiences in China. But we are going to, hey, look at that, I'm wearing the same shirt in the video. I only have I actually have 10 shirts like this, not only kidding, but I have in the same place. What the Chinese government is doing is saying, we'll be happy to show you a movie in our theaters, but we're going to cut out this part of the movie. We're going to change this part of the movie. Here in a movie which features Tom Cruise, and he's basically an ace pilot. We are not going to show that he was doing something based on the decal that he had on the back of his jacket that we in China might not approve of. So Taiwan is a place that China doesn't like. It's an island off China. The government there actually is a successor of the original government that the Chinese took over. So they're not going to show a movie in their country that glorifies Taiwan. So they took off that patch. It's relatively easy to do. You talk about deep fakes. And this happens over and over again. And by the way, China didn't start doing this. I mentioned Karl Popper, the British philosopher, a little while ago. He wrote a two-part book called The Open Society and Its Enemies, and it's a great book. It talks about the dangers that democracy faces. And in that book, it was written like in 1945, there's a very strong critique of Marxism and how did Marxism arise and how Marxism is very anti-democratic. There's also a lot of good philosophy in the book. Plato, Nietzsche, Aristotle, they're all analyzed, but Karl Marx is analyzed also. So the book is published in the Soviet Union, people in the Soviet Union in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, I knew some of those people, had read the book. But guess what? There wasn't a single word of criticism of Karl Marx in that book. And I remember thinking, well, the publisher should not have allowed the Soviets to do that, to publish the book and basically gut the book. Anyway, to get back then to Ted Cruz's bill, here in the United States, the Department of Defense regularly helps movies and movie makers out by providing technical expertise, to basically be a source of advice as to what the military would do in this situation, what this looks like, what's the proper language to use in this case. And what Senator Cruz's bill would do is it would forbid the military from in any way being a resource for movie companies that allow Chinese censors to cut up their movies. And, it's not the most important issue in the world, but I think that's a good idea that Cruz had. And if I were in the Senate, nobody would ever elect me to anything, but if I were in the Senate, I would vote for that bill.
Well, it seems that majority of U.S. movies were big moneymakers for the American studios in China, but China's making their own movies now, and they're bigger than our movies will ever be. So I researched this, and apparently there's 3 types of ways American can get a movie into China. Are you familiar with these 3 ways? There's a limit, right? There's a limit of how many movies a year China will let in. We don't have a limit of how many movies from China come here.
Right.
It's kind of off.
That's true.
So the first one is the limit. You have to be within the limit of movies. Second one is you have to partner up with a Chinese studio. And the third one is a set fee. They buy the movie at a low cost, and they can make all the money they want with it.
Yeah, but the American movie companies, if they know that the movie is going to do very well in China, they do get a pretty hefty set fee. That's why the American movie companies do that in the first place. It's not just a pittance or a nominal amount of money. But the point is, what a lot of people don't realize, and this is true of every place in the world, we're very hot in terms of our popular culture. Everybody wants to see and hear American popular culture. Right. And our movies attract huge audiences in Beijing and other Chinese cities. And the Chinese people are just about as familiar with all of our big movies as Americans are.
Every time I travel, I usually ask people from around the world, what do you guys what's your image of Christmas? And it's usually North American Christmas, and they celebrate Christmas in Brazil and other parts of the world, but it's North American. Snow, all
That's
these
right.
American Christmas music. That was our soft power. Would you say that, the export of our media?
It still is, to a large extent, but it is changing. Getting back to Netflix and Amazon Prime, so Babylon Berlin was made in Germany. Increasingly now, movie making and television have become international places, meaning they're made in various parts of the world. For many years, by the way, American music had that role until the Beatles and the British invasion almost knocked us out of the box. And now we've come back to some extent.
A lot of us, if you asked what their image is, a position of conservatives are of China right now, we already know what they're going to say. They're going to probably say some racist stuff and very extreme stuff, and that we need to do something about it. We need to bring jobs back to America. Okay, that's fine. I agree. But what do you think liberals in general's position about China? Because liberals don't want to be xenophobic, right? But what do you think is in their mindset now that COVID happened and we don't have much of our material things coming at us that we normally were comfortable with?
Well, there's no doubt that COVID has shaken everyone and everything up. But I think that most progressives or liberals that I know, including myself, haven't really changed any of our political positions, at least so far, regarding the virus. And this gets back to what we were talking about before. I was not a fan of Trump before the virus. Mm-hmm. Certainly what he's done during the virus has not made me a fan of him. But I do have to say, there are surprises. For example, I live in New York State. I was okay with Andrew Cuomo as governor. I wasn't a particularly big fan of his. I thought his father, Mario Cuomo, was a better governor. But I have to say, he has stepped up with these daily briefings, his sense of humor, the fact that his own brother, Chris Cuomo from CNN, got the virus, and the way Andrew Cuomo handled that. I have really been very impressed with that. And so in that sense, my view has changed. But I think on, what are we thinking of China? What do we think about the importation of Chinese goods? I think most Americans, and this is an interesting thing of, liberals versus conservatives. I'm not quite clear where the split would be. Most Americans want two things out of the products they buy. They want quality.
And cheap.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, look, I'll tell you the truth. I drove an American car for most of my life. Yeah. But whenever it was about, I know exactly when it was, like back in 2005, I wanted to buy a new car, and I wanted to basically save some money, at the pumps. Not to mention the fact that I didn't want to go to the pumps so often. So we got a Toyota Prius. And I love the car. And then I got a new Prius a couple of years ago. And I think in that sense, I'm a typical American consumer. I paid a little more money for that car than I would have for an equivalent American car. But I bought the car because it had something that I really wanted, which in those days and still is a hybrid engine. I didn't want to go to just a completely electric car. There weren't back then enough battery stations. There still aren't enough. So I think that whether you're liberal or conservative, you want those two things. And that's why Chinese goods do so well here in America. If they're quality goods, and that's a question in itself, and they're not as expensive as American goods, that's where people will go.
My friend Jason, who had a lot of good questions, he told me about a book called Thucydides' Trap. Are you familiar with this? It's a book about Sparta and Athens, and Athens was growing in power, and it put a lot of fear in Sparta. At some point, they just went at it and destroyed each other almost. And the idea is that China and U.S. could be those new Thucydides trap, right? It's a hard word for me.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I'm not worried about that. I'll tell you why. I think a majority of people in China and a majority of people here, and including the governments in both the United States and China, don't want to destroy each other because they know full well were that to have happened, the world would be destroyed. The species would be damaged, maybe irreparably, even worse than from the coronavirus. The difference, of course, between Athens and Sparta is that they were superpowers in that world, but it was a microcosm of the world we're now in.
But now our borders are really close. We're touching on each other almost in policies,
Yeah, well, look, there's going to be a lot of competition, but, I'll give you an example of how I think about these things. One of the things I don't know if you noticed, one of my other consuming interests is space travel, because I think the future of our species is not going to be here on planet. We got to get off this planet and out there. And I was incredibly disappointed, and I still am, with the lack of progress we have made in this country pretty much since, Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon. There were a couple of more trips to the moon. That was it. And, that's horrifying. That happened in the late 60s, early 70s. So I was very happy and still am when I began to hear about the Chinese work in space. And you know what? I hope they succeed. For two reasons. One, it'll stimulate us.
It'll drive us. Our arms race, right?
Space. Two, Chinese are human beings, and I want to see human beings get out in space, because the more that happens, the easier it's going to be for anyone eventually.
There's a little bit of delay there. Okay,
Yeah,
can
I
you hear
just
me?
saw.
So, before going
Yes.
forward, I want to make sure that, my position is not against Chinese people, but I think just the CCP, has an agenda. Chinese people are just as human as us, and we tend to they're indoctrinated with their beliefs that they grew up in, and we're indoctrinated with our Western beliefs. It's hard to be angry at individuals over there for their position.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the important point. We're all human beings, and look, I've had disputes with Chinese people. There's a gentleman, again, I won't mention his name. He's translated many of my books, and he gets back to me with questions. How did you want this or that? And this isn't a question of censorship. It's just a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
And he was saying, well, I said, well, look, this is what I meant, so use those words. And he'll say, but don't you think this would be better? It would certainly flow better in Chinese.
You could change
and
those words.
Well, yeah, and I always say, no, I like my words better. Once in a while, I might agree with him. So we're going to have disagreements. And there's no value in disguising the fact that the U.S. and China are increasingly going to be the two huge competitors on this planet. But I think we have more things in common than we have differences.
Yeah.
I do think China, the rise of capitalism in China, they can't help but become a little more democratic with a small d and less totalitarian. And I think that that's good. So I think we're going to be okay. A far more serious thing are these viruses that kill so many people.
You are an optimist. You did say that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Maybe from reading these books, it kind of like, oh crap. I think we do have some waking up though in the West, thinking that we're so entitled as being the head of the table all the time. We had to work for that. I mean, well, maybe the past has, right? Like you said, during the 50s, there was amazing growth, right?
Yeah.
We worked hard for being head of the table. Have we now? I don't know. Some of us are getting a little bit complacent, and I think we're going to have to wake up to something, to China being right next to us. And they've surpassed us in a lot of ways already.
Yeah, no, that's true. And, again, because they have much more secrecy than we do here, they're probably doing things that we don't even know about at all. Not dangerous things necessarily, but just like, for example, in robotics. I wouldn't be surprised if they have, robots that are ahead of our, robots and what our robots can do.
Well, their supercomputers already beat us, I believe. I heard some numbers on that.
That's right. Yeah, I was just going to say, look, this goes back to World War II. We pretty much won World War II. I mean, we, not England, we saved England. and yeah, Russia helped to some extent, but they were pretty close to being wiped out themselves. And that's what propelled us in the 1950s and even right now to be the leader of the world. But with every year that goes by, those victories in the 1940s are longer ago in history, and things do change.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to share the head of the table, as I say, and it's going to be a pill to swallow. Professor Levinson, how can people find you if they want to connect with you? I know I'm watching you on YouTube. I can follow you there. Is that a good place to connect with you?
It is. This place, the easiest is just Twitter, at Paul Lev. So the @ PAULLEV, that's where I am on Twitter. And in fact, I'm probably on Twitter more than any other place.
Okay.
And, I'm on Facebook as well as Paul Levinson. And, yeah, you can just search on my name. If you go to Amazon and you put my name
I see you everywhere.
quotes, yeah, I try to do as much damage as possible.
Well, it's funny. If you search my name, some criminals show up. I gave that all up, But, we could go on for hours, and I hope that we could talk to you about some of the new progress of what's going on with China, because I think that's going to be really big. I don't think we're finished with this anytime soon, and I hope we can bring you back on again.
I'll be happy to come on anytime. And by the way, I need no notice because I never prepare for anything.
Well, we're all stuck at home. I mean, I'm in a spare bedroom, right? So let's make this happen, right?
I haven't even been able to change my
I
shirt.
know, for what? Was it been 10 days?
This is my Skype shirt.
Yeah, we don't know what's down here myself on this side, so I
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah, yeah. Thank goodness.
Professor, thank you for your time, and I hope we continue this further, okay?
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.